in the right way. Really, really odd stuff here as we are joined by Martín Gallegos, Oakland A's beat reporter for MLB.com. Martín, never really saw anything like this, and thank you for joining us. The A's lose the series to the Mariners, but in every game, the team that won scored 8 runs. That's a little random. The Mariners won 8-1, then the A's won 8-1, and then the Mariners won 8-4.
Yeah, you don't see that too often, right? It was basically, I mean, when you break down the series, it was kind of simple. One team got a good starting pitching performance pretty much every time out, and when the A's didn't get that, they lost those 2 games. But I mean, competitive throughout, and like you mentioned, it kind of being a surprise team throughout MLB, it kind of continued there, even though they lost 2 of 3. The Mariners are probably going to be in this playoff race to the end, and the A's hung with them, for most of it.
We're talking to Martín Gallegos. Martín, thank you so much for joining us, Oakland A's beat reporter for MLB.com. Martín, let's start here. Obviously, there is the off-the-field stuff and the on-the-field stuff when it comes to the A's. We're going to focus mostly on the on-the-field stuff. So for those out here in Sacramento that are starting to watch the A's a bit more because of what the future has in store for the A's, can you give us basically a A's 101 on the roster and some of the names? I think Mason Miller, will get into that. Chris has some questions on Mason Miller, but just the A's 101. If I'm just turning on the TV for the first time and I'm watching the Oakland A's, who are some of the names you should be familiar with? What's the vibe of the team? Can you give us an A's 101?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously the last 2 years, if you just look at the results, they're going through a rebuild and they lost 100 games the last 2 years. And, it was kind of tough just going through that period. But I think now they're starting to reach a point where they're identifying players like Mason Miller, like you mentioned, that are going to be part of this team's future. You look at guys like Zach Geloff, who's currently injured. But a lot of guys who they have coming up the system, like Jacob Wilson, Tyler Soderstrom, Max Muncy, these guys are all getting close to the big leagues, and they're all part of this young core that's going to hopefully get this team back to playoff contention. And they're competing this year basically on the strength of a really strong bullpen. I know Mason Miller gets all the attention, all the love, but there's a few guys in that bullpen that are really impressing this year and kind of surprising a lot of people with the way they're throwing. Lucas Erceg's throwing 100 miles per hour. Austin Adams is getting guys out. So really the pitching has been the big story for them this year and why they're close to 500. You've got guys like Brent Rooker, who was an all-star last year, and he seems to be on an all-star pace this year with his power numbers right now. He just had a big series over there in Seattle, and he's making a case for player of the month this year. So I think the best way to describe them is a young team that's kind of on the rise now after a couple of down years. They went through a rebuild. They're starting to identify pieces, young guys who are going to be a part of this team's future, and they feel like if not this year, in the coming year, they're going to be back into playoff contention like they were before they kind of tore the roster down from 2018 to 2021.
Wow. Yeah. I'm sure Sacramento A's fans are loving to hear that. And I mean, the big difference or the big jump this year that the A's have made through 42 games last year, they were 9-33. This year, they're 19-23. They weren't in the Shohei race. The last time I checked, they did not get Ohtani this offseason. They, weren't in any of the big races. They didn't really bring in any big free agent names. To you, what's been the big difference from last year to this year? Is it really just internal growth?
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times you look at last year, a lot of these guys who are on this current team weren't here the last 2 years. So they really weren't a part of all that losing. They were in the minor leagues winning games together. And I kind of talked about this with a guy like Brett Harris, who they just called up last week. He's one of their top prospects as well. All these guys, whether it's, Zach Geloff, Lawrence Butler, Tyler Soderstrom, Mason Miller, all these guys came up through the minors together, and they were winning ball games down there. And they were watching the big league team obviously struggle with a lot of guys who aren't here anymore. They were just kind of stopgaps because they got rid of so many good players over the last couple of years. But now all these guys who, have developed throughout the minors, some of them are still down there, but a lot of them are making their way up here. And they've kind of brought that culture that they had of winning down there. They were used to winning throughout their minor league careers. And so now that they're winning here a little bit more, it's not really a surprise to them because, they've been doing this at AA, AAA, and now it's just in the major leagues where they're doing it. So, they're still learning on the fly. They're still young, and they're still probably going to go through their ups and downs like any young players. But I think right now they're gaining a lot of confidence with the way that they've played over this first month.
Talking to Martín Gallegos, Oakland A's beat reporter for MLB.com. Martín, how unique has it been? Obviously, I mean, it was probably the craziest day of sports radio I've ever done when the announcement came down that the A's will be playing the next couple years in Sacramento. How unique has it been covering this team with everything else going on? And as far as when you're, interviewing some of the players, what's been the vibe? Is it just, hey, that's really has nothing to do with us. We play where we're told. Or have people been able to power through it? Are they rallying around everything? I mean, you have the reverse boycotts, you have people not showing up, and they're not the only ballpark that doesn't get a lot of fans. But how has the vibe of the team been, and how has it been for you covering the team with everything else going on?
Yeah, it's certainly a unique situation. I mean, no other team in baseball is going through something like this, so it is different. I think. Yeah, like the players, I just try to, focus on this year now. Now at least we know kind of where they're going to play next year. For a while, it was like, where the lease was up after this year at the Coliseum. Nobody knew where they were going to play. Were they going to stay there for a little bit longer? Were they going to go, Sacramento or, Salt Lake City was in play, it felt like. So at least now we know they're going to be there next year. But as far as the players, I don't think they really worry about it too much. A lot of these guys are still just trying to make it in the big leagues, period. Right. So they can't really think about, next year. They're just trying to make it this year. But a lot of them have played at that Sacramento ballpark, obviously in the minor leagues, and they like the aesthetics of it. It's a really nice ballpark. Obviously, it does need some upgrades, which the A's are planning to do. So I think they're hopeful that those come through. But I think they're focused on this year and trying to surprise some people, and they feel like they've done that here early on. And I think with it being the last year in Oakland, they also want to kind of pay tribute to the city of Oakland and the fans that do show up. Obviously, there's a large fan base. I mean, you guys know the complicated situation that's gone on here for years with them, but They do know that there's a segment of fans that are out there that care about this team, that watch them. They might not show up to the ballpark, but they want to see them do well. So I think part of their motivation for this year is, being the last year in Oakland, let's kind of go out with a bang and try to win as many games as possible.
Yeah, Martín, and you've been talking about Mason Miller as well, and I think that's somebody who's definitely, his name has sparked up this past week. It feels like things started to ramp up when it comes to, is this somebody who's going to be available at the trade deadline? Because obviously the A's have a history of, these guys get really good and then ship them off before they have to get paid. It sounds like it might be a little bit of a different situation where the A's might actually be trying to build towards something here. Just from your perspective, do you think Mason Miller will be here by the end of the trade deadline? And do you see him being here in Sacramento next season?
I think definitely, yeah. I think next year for sure, at the very least. I mean, he's still got 6 years of control. He's barely a rookie. I mean, it would have to be like a monumental package of like players, top prospects to even get the A's, I think, really to pick up the phone and seriously entertain anything. I think at this point, they've identified him as such a supreme talent that, there's no reason to trade him at this point. They don't really have anything to gain. They're rebuilding, and he's part of this rebuild. I mean, he's so young, still improving, still developing, which is crazy to think because he's so dominant right now, but he's still, I mean, he's only pitched, I don't even think he's got 100 innings of professional baseball under his belt. He's really still kind of a young kid in that aspect. He's gone through some injuries, but he's really taken to that closer role. And it seems like this is going to be something that he can take and run with and be a dominant closer for a long time. And, to answer your question, I don't think he gets traded this year. I think, obviously I saw the report that came out, but it would require a lot for them to even, think about doing something like that.
Martín Gallegos, thank you so much. Oakland A's beat reporter for MLB.com. This has been great. We will definitely have you on again soon as the A's continue to surprise some people, and next season as well when they're up here playing at Sutter Health.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
Coming up next, more info on the A's and what is happening with Vegas. David